Good evening. Tonight we've come to the market town of Melton Mowbray in Leicestershire. Often known as the rural capital of food, it's home not only, of course, to its famous pork pies, but also to one of the very few places licensed to make Stilton. But politics, not pies, is on the minds of our local audience members who've been arriving as they think about and prepare what they want to ask our panel and, of course, say to you at home. And as a group, as usual, they reflect the general electoral picture across the nation. And tonight they've got lots of questions, including, can we have economic growth and fight climate change at the same time? Welcome to Question Time. On our panel is Treasury Minister James Murray. He's part of the government team led by the Chancellor Rachel Reeves, trying, as they put it, to go further and faster in improving economic growth. Kieran Mullan is the Conservatives' Shadow Justice Minister. Before his election to Parliament, he was a doctor in accident and emergency and was also a volunteer police officer. Helen Morgan is in her fourth year as a Liberal Democrat MP, having won the North Shropshire by-election, overturning centuries of Conservative domination there. She speaks for her party on health and social care. Zia Yusuf chairs Reform UK, who won over 4 million votes and 5 seats in last year's general election, and his party is now polling so strongly, he predicts Nigel Farage will be our next Prime Minister. And Alison Phillips ran the Daily Mirror from 2018 until last year. She's now a columnist for the political magazine The New Statesman, as well as the I newspaper. Good evening. Welcome to our panellists. Welcome to our audience here in Melton Mowbray. Great to see you all. Thank you very much for turning out. And, of course, welcome to you at home. You can join the conversation on social media, as always, or, you can just sit back and listen and watch the thing. Anyway, let's hear our first question, which is from Rachel Roberts.
Growth or green? Are they mutually exclusive?
So, of course, we had the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, making her big proposals, big plans on growth, one of which has run in some controversy, and I assume this is what you're referring to, is a third runway at Heathrow, amongst a number of other things. That had previously been opposed by many in the Labour Party as being something that was not in line with climate commitments, but is now being backed by the Labour Party. Growth or green, are they mutually exclusive, James?
We can have both. Both are in our plan for change, which we set out as a government. We want to get the economy growing and we want to transition to net zero. And we know that the two are not only compatible, but actually they can help each other. So if you take, for example, the sprint that we're making on clean energy to try and make our energy transition to have homegrown energy here in the UK with wind turbines and solar panels and so on, all of that drives economic growth, as well as giving us energy independence and bringing down bills. So the drive to decarbonise our economy, to transition our economy, goes hand in hand with economic growth. And we see that as being a really important way of putting more money in people's pockets.
But when it comes to the third runway, I mean, I've listened to Rachel Reeves talking about the various ways in which she thinks that could be in line with the government's climate commitments, such as a sustainable aviation fuel. But that is a minuscule fraction of all jet fuel in flights leaving the UK. And the target is 2%. And then she talked about electric planes with batteries, but that's way off.
Well, let me talk about Heathrow and airport expansion more broadly, because...
Well, in terms of meeting your climate commitment, that's the question.
Absolutely. Let me address that very, very directly, because as the Chancellor set out in her growth speech this week, we're determined to support airport expansion where it contributes towards economic growth and where it's in line with our climate obligations. Now, the way that climate obligations are managed in this country are through carbon budgets, and we will be publishing an updated carbon budget later this year. But within the current carbon budget, that assumes expansion of Heathrow, including a third runway. So we know there is a pathway to achieving this. There's a pathway to making sure...
How do you do it?
Well, it's by looking at the whole economy. It's all of the emissions all across the economy. It's net zero. So there will be...
So even if... Sorry, I'm trying to...
Yes,
just to make sure I understand. So even if Heathrow and a third runway increases our carbon emissions, you are suggesting that they would be offset or reduced somewhere else to make up for that? Is that what you're saying?
There will be some parts of the economy where there might be residual emissions, even if, as we're putting lots of money and investment into sustainable aviation fuel and better technologies for aircraft, if there are parts of the economy where there are residual emissions, overall, as an economy, we're moving to net zero. And that's what we mean by making this transition to net zero, and exactly why airport expansion is compatible with our climate obligations, and we're determined to make sure we take these decisions. Because, look, the decision around Heathrow, around the third runway at Heathrow, has been going on and on and on for years, and governments have just ducked it, they've shied away from it, they haven't wanted to take the decision.
And also the current Prime Minister opposed it.
Well, there's lots of, for many, many years, but for many, many years, governments have not taken this decision. But what we've said is we are going to take the right decisions.
Okay.
We're going to take those decisions that need to be taken to get the economy growing.
All right. I'm going to come around the rest of the panel, of course, but given this is a government decision, what do you think of that answer?
Well, I completely get it about growth, as I work with a lot of businesses, and something is needed. But as a mum and a grandmum, the Greens question is massive. Because where are we going to be in 10, 20 years? And there's a lot of talk about it, but I think there was a lot, Rachel Reeves was saying this morning, this new air fuel, et cetera, has really come on leaps and bounds. But where is the evidence for me, my family, that this is the case? And I wonder whether concentrating on infrastructure, which is quite a long way down the line, whether we shouldn't be looking at more short-term growth stimulation that doesn't quite damage the economy, climate quite as much as this will.
OK, let me come around the rest of the panel. I will come back to you as well. Kieran? Well, I mean, this is something that the Conservatives support, the runway. Didn't do it, of course,
yeah, when it was
but you're supporting it now.
When it was before Parliament last time, we had supported it. But I have to say, I think yesterday was pretty desperate stuff from the Labour Party. They announced what they said was a whole new set of projects were all designed to implement growth, except it turned out most of them weren't new and they weren't the Labour Party's ideas.
What, they were your ideas?
They were, many of the projects were previous ideas. I mean, some of the projects...
So why didn't you do them
Well,
then?
no, some of them, in fact, are completing this year that we started. So some of the infrastructure projects are things that we started, funded... That
what, nine new reservoirs?
Some of the projects. The majority of the projects are not new and are not the Labour Party's ideas. And actually, as Rachel has said, the issue with the focus on Heathrow, the problem with growth at the moment is not a long-term problem, it's a short-term problem. So they inherited an economy from us, which was the fastest-growing economy in the G7, and across our time in government from 2010, we were one of the fastest-growing economies, and they've turned that into an absolute hard stop. We've gone from the fastest-growing economy in the G7 to zero
in that
growth
final
in
quarter.
the economy. In the final quarter, and overall, over the time we were in office, we were one of the fastest growing economies in the G7, and now countries that we were previously ahead of were now falling behind, and so Labour are desperate to find reasons to get that going. And it's no surprise when you do things like plan for a jobs tax, the national insurance rise, which even the OBR, that the Labour put so much stock in, even the OBR says that jobs tax is going to suppress growth. They're desperate to get growth, and as I said, we support growth too. Well, let's come to
Rachel's question. Growth or green, are they mutually exclusive? Do you think there can be a third runway at Heathrow, which is in line with our climate?
Yes, I think that is possible, and I think, as James has alluded to, across the whole economy, that you can shift and balance in different ways. And actually, our track record as a country, we are one of the fastest decarbonising economies in the G7, so that leaves us with some wriggle room. And I would just point out that whilst we're kind of debating heavily one runway, China in the middle of building 20 new airports. And so we've got to recognise this is a global issue, and whilst we have our role to play, I don't want to see the UK fall further behind on the back of an overzealous attempt to meet these targets that we're already doing reasonably well on. OK, the man at the back with the red sweater.
Thank you, Fiona. The debate seems to be very London-centric. I'm very sympathetic with the Green agenda. However, in this region, we've got Birmingham Airport and Manchester Airport, both of them are major airports. Why don't we have why can't those cities have another runway? Because they're both major economies. And for example, the Conservative Party in the last Parliament, Rishi Sunak pulled the plug on George Osborne's legacy, the Northern Powerhouse. We're meant to have a train line going from London all the way to Manchester and Leeds. So you kind of ruined your own growth agenda there in the last Parliament. OK, now I know there are things you'll want to talk about that are happening locally. I'll come back to you, James, but I promise I will. Yes, the man there. Yes, with your hand up, yeah.
Yes, mine was almost the same, but part of the argument is that Heathrow is a hub airport and people fly into Heathrow and then fly on to other places in Europe. And all those passengers could be done at Birmingham, and then they could use HS2 if they want to come to London, or if they're just flying off somewhere else, they could do that from Birmingham or East Midlands or anywhere up north, or any airport could have the extra runway. OK, and the man behind you.
Thank you. Could perhaps a member of the panel explain why it's taking or could take up to 25 years to build essentially a large strip of tarmac in London?
And when you put it so beautifully. Yeah. All right. Well, listen, there's a lot of questions for you, and I'm going to come back to you, but I want to come around the rest of the panel. Helen.
So,
growth or green, are they mutually exclusive? And Rachel's referring in particular, they're possibly referring to other things as well, but in particular to the third runway at Heathrow.
So in general, I don't think they are mutually exclusive, but I think the Heathrow runway is problematic because Heathrow is one of our biggest carbon emitters. The growth that's forecast to come from Heathrow is 0.43% of GDP by 2050. So it's really a bit of a drop in the ocean in terms of growth. And it seems to me that when we talk about short-term measures to improve growth, we're ignoring the elephant in the room, which is the mountain of red tape that businesses have to wade through when they want to deal with Europe. So, for example, you know, we're in a place where a lot of cheese is made. I have a cheesemaker in my constituency of North Shropshire who lost a whole consignment because one box hadn't been correctly filled in on an export form. And that is crazy by anybody's standards. So what we would like to see is the government go further with our relationship with the EU, negotiate a proper customs union, get rid of that mountain of red tape and release an enormous amount of growth without having to build a runway at Heathrow.
And rejoining the customs union, should people want that to happen, how long do you think that would take?
I think a customs union could be relatively straightforward and quick to negotiate because
with the EU? You think that would be quick?
Yeah, I think relatively quick. I mean,
like
nothing,
what?
A couple of years.
OK.
Yeah.
If we roll over and agree to everything they want, I'm sure it could do, but, you know, that's not the approach that we should be taking.
A customs union, though, is a separate thing from a political agreement. We're not talking about rejoining the single market or indeed the whole thing, but literally reducing rules of origin rules that allow businesses to trade much more easily. It's our biggest trading market. We know that the botched deal that the Conservatives did when we left Europe has cost us 4% over 15 years of GDP growth. It's the most single thing we could do, the single biggest thing we could do to improve growth, and I think we should seize that opportunity.
Zia, I imagine you're not going to agree with that, but let me just bring you up the question. Growth or green, are they mutually exclusive?
They're not mutually exclusive, but I would say one thing. I love the question about why it's going to take us 25 years to build a very flat amount of tarmac on the outskirts of London. This is a country that has an incredible pedigree in building things. 175 years ago, Isambard Kingdom Brunel built the Royal Albert Bridge. That is a 2,000-foot-long bridge that carries trains 100 feet above the water. It still stands and works today. Do you know how long it took him? 5 years. China builds a runway in a year. They built an entire international airport in Beijing in 5 years. And by Rachel Reeves' own target, it's going to take 10 years to build this third runway. And we all know what happens when a Labour or Tory politician gives you a target. Look at HS2. It'll be massively over budget and it'll be massively late. We need a total bonfire of all of the red tape that stops the United Kingdom from building. I will tell you, we have so many incredible engineers in this country who are just desperate to unleash the power of the British economy, and that's what reform will do.
And do you think the third runway is a good idea?
I think, in principle, it is a good idea. The reality is, as you pointed out, Keir Starmer himself opposed it. I think the most powerful Labour politician in the country, Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, he has come out opposing it. So we all know what's going to happen here. Huge amounts of British taxpayer money is going to get wasted, and we're never going to see that runway unless we see a reform government.
OK. Alison?
I don't think they need to be mutually exclusive, but I do think at the moment there is a real need for growth. So there's just two things, really, I think that we need, which is that people need to feel better off, because we've had an awful long time now of people really struggling every time they go to the shops and worrying at the end of the month. And also, I think they also need to feel better more broadly about the country. I think we need to feel better that, you know, there's enough police to get shoplifters. We need to feel better that our kids are going into school and there's enough teachers. We need to feel better that we're not waiting forever on a waiting list. So that obviously requires growth for the whole country. When it comes to Heathrow, I am slightly concerned that of all the opportunities to get growth, this is one that is going to have an impact on climate. Well, I can see why she's done it, and I slightly differ from you, because I think the reason that Rachel Reeves has gone for this big, emblematic, yes, we're going to do Heathrow, is because she wants to show she's up for the fight. So after the difficulties that the government has had, perhaps over the last few months, about convincing business that they are pro-growth, this is a very visible way of saying, yes, we want this fight, we are going to get to growth. But the crucial thing for all of us here is that we feel the benefits of that growth. There's no point really that, you know, GDP goes up or whatever, and it all ends up remaining in the hands of that tiny number of people that control so much of the wealth in this country. We've got to find a way, particularly to the point about it being regionally shared, this money, and there's got to be a greater sense of fairness that this money is felt by ordinary working people.
OK. James, let me come back to you then, because the point made at the back was, why is it going to take, you know, why is there not more happening more locally? Why is it going to take so long?
Well, a couple of points on that. Firstly, as I think one of the people in the audience mentioned, Heathrow is a hub airport. It's an important national asset, and that's not just for passengers in terms of transiting from one flight to another. It's also for freight. So 60% of air freight goes through Heathrow. 60% of the benefit of Heathrow expansion will be felt outside of London and the South East, but much closer to where we are here. Yesterday, in her speech, the Chancellor also announced the new investment which is going into the East Midlands Airport, Freeport there, which is a joint venture with Prologis, who are going to be investing in advanced manufacturing and logistics. So there's £1 billion of investment which is going in not too far from here, 2,000 extra jobs. And I think, you know, what's really important for me, because yes, things take time. It absolutely should not take 25 years. The gentleman is absolutely right to say that. But what we need is stability and certainty from a government who says, we're going to do this and we're going to get on with it. And what that does is it then helps other businesses to invest. So when you have the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, the whole Cabinet, all of us as ministers coming out and saying, we're going to take this tough decision on Heathrow. We know that not everyone is going to agree with us, but we're going to do it. That then gives that stability and that certainty for other businesses to invest, and people can start to feel the benefits of that investment and growth. And ultimately, as Alison said, why do we do growth? Why are we so focused on growth? And it's about putting more money in people's pockets. You know, that's why we need to get the economy growing, because that's the way to make people across Britain better off.
OK, I'm going to take another question, because there's lots of questions and I want to see if I can get through a few more. I just would like to tell you that where we are next week, which is Glasgow, and the week after that we're in Northwich in Cheshire. So if you live in or around either area and you'd like to be part of the audience, do please apply. So that's Glasgow and Northwich. And then the week after that we're in London, so that's February the 20th, with a special focus on Ukraine, because that is the week of the 3rd anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine. We're going to have our audience as usual, but we are also particularly keen to have Ukrainians in that audience. Ukrainians who've come over here or Ukrainians who live here. So if you are Ukrainian and you'd like to come and be a part of that audience and talk about what's happening in Ukraine, again, go to the Question Hour website, follow the instructions there, and we would love to see you. February the 20th. OK. Simon Brown, where are you?
Good evening.
Right, let's have your question.
In light of Donald Trump's blaming diversity programmes for last night's plane crash in Washington, should we review our own diversity programmes?
Right, so I don't know how many of you have caught up with this. This happened only in the last couple of hours. So, as you may be aware, there was a tragic crash between a plane and a helicopter over Washington, D.C. They both went into the river, into Potomac, and everyone died. There's investigation going on at the moment, and that has not come to any conclusions that we know of. Donald Trump did a half-hour press conference, and in it, he talked about the Federal Aviation Administration, which is, you know, has traffic control, amongst other things. And he said, when people were asking why did they think the crash had happened, he said, the Federal Aviation Administration is actively recruiting workers who suffer severe intellectual disabilities, psychiatric problems and other mental and physical conditions under a diversity and inclusion hiring initiative. And he has ordered all US government staff working on this diversity, equity and inclusion programmes be put on immediate paid leave. He was saying, look, I don't know why the crash happened, but he's clearly wondering if that had anything to do with it, and if that is a reason why the crash happened. Was it that the person, the traffic controller, didn't know what they were doing? As I said, he didn't say he knew why, but this was something he raised very strongly in the press conference. Kieran.
Well, as you might imagine, my thoughts are primarily about what it must be like for the families of the people that were on that flight right now. Whenever something like that happens, I don't know about you in the audience, but I just imagine how I'd feel if it was my sister or my niece or nephew on a plane and you hear it on the news. It just be awful. And it's right that the American authorities proceed with an investigation and try and understand what's happened. And just
but clearly, Donald Trump's decided ahead of the investigation to say, I think this has got something to do with it.
Well, I think Question Time will be spending a lot of time talking about Donald Trump in the next few years and what he may and might say at a particular occasion.
Sure, but what Simon's asking is, should we be reviewing our own diversity practices
No, I think we should wait to see what the American authorities uncover. And global aviation safety is just that. It's globally delivered, and actually most jurisdictions spend a lot of time
looking at... Should we be reviewing our own diversity practices?
I don't think we should be doing anything until we see the findings of the American authorities' investigation, and then I'm sure the Civil Aviation Authority will pay attention to that, see if there are any lessons that we can learn, and just to be reassured, really, that actually flying in this country is incredibly safe. We haven't had a fatality in this country from flying for decades, and I'm sure that will continue, and I have every faith that the Civil Aviation Authority will look at any findings from an actual investigation. So
it's interesting that you don't think that we should be doing anything about our quality, diversity, inclusion practices. Your leader, I might just point out, Kemi
on the back of this event, should we be doing that? On the back of this event,
should we review?
I don't think that on the back of this event we should be rushing for action.
Should we review them anyway? Because Kemi Badenoch, just your leader, I presume you agree with that. Maybe not. Let's hear it. Says equality, diversity, inclusion practices such as diversity training have little to no tangible impact in increasing diversity. She said high workplace spending on EDI, equality, diversity, inclusion, but they show poor results and low understanding of what works and what doesn't.
Sure, and I'll answer the question, but just to re-emphasise, I think if I was a relative watching...
you've made that point. Now answer this. Do you agree with your leader?
Potentially died, turned into something else. But I'm happy to say that I do think more generally, stepping clearly away from what's actually happened, which are tragic events, I do think we have to look at how we practice diversity, equality and inclusion in this country. I found in my own experience working perhaps in the NHS, there is room for these initiatives. Of course, we should pay some attention to things like racial equality, women's equality in the workplace. We should consider these things. I think when I speak to my constituents and voters, what they feel is it's become disproportionate, that why perhaps an organisation like an NHS Trust, there should be somebody looking at these issues. Should an NHS Trust whose main focus which should be on delivering care, should there be a whole team of people whose job that is? I don't think so. So I think we need to look at how we balance these things, not ignoring the rights and issues that affect minorities and other diversities, but let's make sure that the British public feel like most of the time, most of the public sector is focused on looking after everybody equally.
Zia.
Well, look, firstly, the most important thing to say is that my thoughts go out to the relatives of the victims of this tragedy. I certainly don't think that we should be drawing any conclusions at all about DEI or anything else without a full inquiry.
I mean, Donald Trump has gone quite far in doing that. Do you think he's wrong to have done that? He's a big friend of the party, obviously.
I don't think... I have enormous admiration for President Trump, but until we have the facts of the matter, until the investigation is done, I don't think it's appropriate to be speculating as to what the cause is.
So you've spoken too soon?
Look, after a tragedy like this, I don't think it's appropriate to be making political points.
And in terms of Simon's question, should we review our own diversity practice in this country? What's the Reform position on that?
Well, Reform is very, very clear about this. It's in our contract with the people that, speaking of President Trump, during his inaugural speech, he just, obviously a few days ago, he said, he invoked the spirit of Martin Luther King Jr. and said America will once again be a country that is colourblind and merit-based. That is exactly the sort of country that we will have in the United Kingdom under a Reform government. The reality is, and I say this as obviously as someone who is an ethnic minority, has worked in some large American companies that have DEI programs, it doesn't do anybody any good. The reality is that as soon as you either judge people based on immutable characteristics or you judge people on merit. You either say you want equality of outcome or equality of opportunity. You cannot have both. A Reform government will invoke that spirit of Martin Luther King Jr. and say, listen, people should be judged on the content of their character and their merit and absolutely not on the colour of their skin.
Could I just say very quickly, in the last election... It's good to hear Zia say that, but the Reform candidate that I ran against in the last election said that all women were a sponging gender and that they should get less access to healthcare and other public services because they didn't contribute
we
as
obviously
much
had
in
issues
tax.
with candidates in that election. I'd be the first person to say that. I wasn't involved in the party then, We now, that does not represent the views of the party, and that candidate was stood down.
No, he wasn't.
We do not have...
He wasn't stood down. You let him carry on and he ran all the way to the election.
Such candidates will never again be allowed to stand for the party. We have the most rigorous vetting process of any political party. We've already vetted thousands and thousands of candidates for the elections coming up in May. We are being very clear about what reform stands for. If you believe in family, if you believe in community, if you believe in your country, regardless of your background, regardless of your faith, or even if you don't have a faith, this is the party for you.
OK. Man in the glasses.
I just wanted to ask, obviously, Reform supported Donald Trump quite heavily in the presidential election, and Nigel Farage was over there cheerleading for him quite a lot. You've just said this is the party and this is what we stand for. So do you stand by those comments that he made, which, Fiona, I don't know if you want to read them out again?
Well, yes. I mean, you said you thought you shouldn't prejudge it. That's what you were saying.
Yes.
That Donald Trump was wrong to prejudge the outcome of the investigation.
You can be very, very good friends with somebody and consider them a close friend, as Nigel does with President Trump, and not agree with everything they say.
I mean, last time he didn't agree with me, he said Nigel Farage shouldn't be the leader of the party.
I think you're mistaking him for somebody else.
Oh, that was Musk, of course. That was Musk. What am I thinking?
Yes,
of course.
Let's not conflate things now.
But, of course, they are close allies. No, you're quite right. You're quite right. I'm mistaken because, of course, they are... Well, one assumes they're still very good buddies. Yes, man here in the front.
Yeah, I think it's incredible that I actually believe what Miss Yusuf is saying is correct. Like, I wouldn't have thought I'd agree with anything you say, to be fair. But why are we listening to anything that Donald Trump is saying so early into any investigation? It's just crazy. The man is out of his mind anyway.
OK. The woman here in the middle. Yes.
It's less than a week since the anniversary of the Auschwitz catastrophe. Haven't we learned anything?
It was Monday. Yeah, it was Monday, yeah.
Yeah. Haven't we learned anything about the risks of using diversity as a measure by which we make decisions?
OK. James?
I think, firstly, it's worth me saying, as other panellists have said, my immediate thoughts are with the families of people affected by what's happened in Washington. In terms of the investigation and so on, I really don't think it's for me to comment on that. It is for the American authorities.
I'm not asking you to comment on it. The question is, should we... I mean, Donald Trump is commenting on it. The question from Simon is, should we review our own diversity practices? So just for those of you... I mean, our laws are different here when it comes to diversity and affirmative action to the United States. But the UK government strategy, Equality, Diversity, Inclusion Strategy, says the 20 to 24 goal, so this is predating, you haven't changed it, building a diverse and inclusive workforce that reflects and understands the public we serve. That's the position here.
Well, I think there's a principle there, which is that public servants should reflect the public who they serve. And I think actually having different views and different people in public service is a good thing. I think when you start...
And companies as well?
Across the economy. I think we should make sure that opportunities are available to everyone and everyone can get a job and work in different industries, and that different sectors reflect the public who they serve or who they are, who their customers are. I think when you talk about the programmes around the diversity, equality, inclusion programmes, I really think this is where we could do with a bit of common sense, because, I think people understand there is a value to having an inclusive approach to your workforce and making sure people have opportunities, but you don't want it to go too far. And I think it is just a common sense question here, where most people have a reasonable view on this. You want to make sure that any public money is obviously value for money, and we're not wasting money on something which doesn't deliver that value for money. But I do think there's a place a way to see this, which just sees it as being a common sense solution. And as long as it's offering value for money and it's making sure we're getting good public services, or where businesses are performing well, then it's important to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to get jobs in whatever industry they want.
OK, woman in the glasses there.
Is there been a leaning towards it being a quota when it comes to EDI in companies and also in public service? Has there been a leaning towards having to fill that quota rather than actually assessing on merit and whether that person's suitable for the job? And I don't think anybody who comes from a diverse background would want to be part of a quota.
And are you asking that, is that your experience, or is that just you're wondering if that's happening?
It's my knowledge.
Yeah.
In work that I do, EDI isn't always level-handed. It's a quota sometimes. You'll get people that are going for jobs where, yes, they want a female in it or they want a male in it. They're interview process will have a diverse selection of people to interview, but their criteria selection is not necessarily leaning that way.
Right, OK. Man here in the front.
I'm ex-military and frontline emergency services during COVID. ED&I has a good spirit about it, you know, equality of opportunity. But in both emergency services and the military, I've seen it hijacked. And it should be the right person, the best person for the job. I don't care what colour you are, what gender you are, who you go to bed with, or how many you go to bed with, I don't care. But if you can't do the job, you should not be pushed through promotions that you don't deserve or are not capable. That's the most important thing.
And when you say you've seen it hijacked, what do you mean?
How long have you got?
Well, not that long, but give us an example.
People appointed to positions where they professionally aren't either qualified or they've failed courses and be pushed through. Standards being lowered to accept and get the quotas filled. So many. Even if someone fails on safety, push them through. Well, we need more of them. Push them through. You know, and if you're an instructor like I was, that's then your integrity that's tainted, and it literally goes downhill from there. And all it does is weaken the country, whether it's public service or military, or it just weakens the country.
OK, so Alison, Simon's question, should we review our own diversity practice? I mean, as a counterbalance to what you're saying, I mean, some might argue that in order to overcome unconscious bias, amongst other things, or outright prejudice, amongst other things, you need to be thinking about these things and to put people forward who either might not feel that the opportunity is there for them in any other way.
Yeah, I mean, first off, I saw the Donald Trump press conference just before we came in here, and I thought it was absolutely disgusting. He was stood there and he was saying, not knowing how this awful, terrible accident had occurred, and 3 American service people have died in this, and he is essentially saying that either they or somebody else within that service is responsible for that terrible tragedy because of a diversity programme, when he's got absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. So I thought that was absolutely repellent from him. On the point about what we should be doing here, I think we are very different to the United States in how we carry out diversity. And I think I have seen a lot of examples where it's done amazing good in a workplace, and I've seen it in places where I've worked as well. If you've got an organisation that isn't catering to its audience or its customers in an effective way because it can't reflect them, it can't understand their requirements, it is absolutely vital. And I think it's really unfortunate if you feel that people have been promoted that shouldn't have been promoted. But what has to be done in the first place is you've got to get people in the door. So, I mean, I know when I sort of started out in journalism, it was pretty much populated by middle-aged white men, and no one else really had a chance. And you had to get people that opportunity, and then you've got to make them feel comfortable where they can thrive, and then they can go on to do great things. That doesn't mean to say you lower the standards. It just means you are conscious of what people need to thrive and survive. And I would hate it if there has been some excesses which have turned people against it when the opportunity to really reshape how we do things for the better is there.
Helen?
Well, I think I'm just echo your comments about the press conference before we came in, actually. I mean, many people have died, and that's a tragedy, and we should be thinking about them and their loved ones this evening, and not immediately jumping for someone to blame to get some kind of political soundbite out of it. I think that's appalling. Looking at diversity programmes more widely, I think we should look at why businesses, particularly private businesses, have embraced them in the first place. And that's not necessarily because they want to fill up quotas of people, but because they want to attract people who might otherwise not want to apply for those jobs. They feel as if they're missing out on talent pools because people from different backgrounds look at that and say, oh, well, that's just all middle-aged white men, I won't go for that. Look at politics, that's all middle-aged white men. Lots of women don't feel comfortable in that space. And you miss out on potentially really talented people. So the point of those programmes is to make sure that companies can get the best people into the jobs by casting their net a bit wider and being a bit more open-minded about who they take on. And I think it would be a shame if we lost that. I don't think anybody wants to see a quota system. I think everybody wants to see people promoted on merit. And if you get it right, you can absolutely have both.
Could I just give an example directly from healthcare? When you study to become a doctor in this country, after you finish your medical training, you then have 2 years, your medical degree, you have 2 years of what's called foundation training. And when I did it, it was a competitive process. You had to get the top grades in your university, and they were all ranked, and you got the place you wanted to go because you'd perform better than the other students. And they've recently changed that to remove the competitive element. And one of the reasons why they removed the competitive element was they said that certain ethnic minorities were not doing as well in that competition. I think that's just a really good example of, well, surely the priority should be rewarding and getting behind the people at medical school who are doing the best and are going to be the best doctors, not getting rid of the competition because some people from certain backgrounds aren't doing as well. Yes, absolutely, help people from different backgrounds get there, but don't change the outcome to make it easy for them, because is that not just unfair on everybody else, but actually it's a disservice to those people from ethnic minority backgrounds who are perfectly capable and just as able to get to through those competitive hurdles. And that's just one example, and I think the audience will know of many other examples like that on their own are not a huge deal, but subtly create this atmosphere where competition and get reward for best performance get squashed a little bit in the aid of diversity, and I just don't think that's right.
But isn't the counterbalance, I can understand that point, but isn't the counterbalance that if you've only got a certain type of person becoming a doctor, then there's all sorts of people who might feel that when they go to a doctor, there's not somebody there who they feel they want to be seen by?
Which is why I agree. There are things you can do. Let's support people who are studying, encourage people to apply to medical school who don't normally do that. Don't, at the other end, change the rules because you think the outcome isn't the one that you want. And it's the same, look at in politics. Labour have all-women shortlists for some of their selections to get women to be MPs. We've never used all-women shortlists, and we've had female prime ministers. So I think it's about looking at encouraging people from bottom up, not from the top, using equality and diversity as a way to change the rules for the benefit of a certain number of people.
And also, we don't want to feel that it's a zero-sum game and some people are losing out, because I think that becomes a wedge issue, which, as we can see, is just driving people apart when we should be trying to get back together.
Let's take another question. Lots of you asked about this. Rachel Dawes. There you are.
With the increase in housing developments in Melton Mowbray, how do we ensure schools, healthcare and policing will meet the demand?
Now, I'm assuming, Rachel, are you referring... Is the thing that's prompted this question the big housing development that's happening in this area? I think it's about 1,200 homes.
We've got a lot, every access.
So tell us what's happening then and why you're asking.
So there's lots of houses being built all around. We've got obviously the new bypass, and the whole bypass has planning around it that could be utilised. And with that, especially for myself, is that schools are full. The secondary school level are full. So what are we going to do about that when my daughter in 5 years' time needs to go to secondary school with all these new houses, but there's not new schools being built? And in terms of policing, there's been a lot of crime recently in the local area, and the police have had to up their sort of presence for that. How are we going to combat this? What's the plan?
So would you rather there were fewer homes built? Is that what you're saying?
I think if there's going to be more homes, then we need to build more schools, and then obviously that's a cascade of issues with teaching and everything.
And everything comes with it. And presumably you're thinking about GP surgeries as well, and
yeah, definitely
bus services,
GP.
or
We've only
whatever
got
it might
one
be.
doctors in the whole of Melton.
Right, Helen.
I mean, I think the point that you're making is extremely valid, and wherever you go and whoever you talk to, the answer that they say is, we're fine with the new housing, but we need the infrastructure to go with it. And I've got a small village in North Shropshire called Welshhampton, and they've had a number of new houses built recently. And the thing that they've said consistently on the doorstep is, no problem with the new housing, but we'd really like a main sewer. We don't have one. The septic tanks are problematic. It's causing environmental damage. We'd really like a sewer to go with all of these houses, and I think that's quite reasonable. We do have to build houses at scale because we have a housing shortage, but we really need to make sure that those decisions are being made locally, I think, with a plan to go with them to provide all the things that you've described: schools, GPs, bus routes, big one for me, a sewer if you're not on the mains network.
So what's going wrong, Helen? Because looking into it, because I knew that we were going to look at Rachel's question, she submitted it for just as you arrived. Things like the local infrastructure is typically funded by developers under... they can make contributions to... They don't build them themselves, but they make contributions to local authorities as part of the development plan that they come up with. It's something called the Section 106 agreements, community living. And then so local developers give money to the local authority, and then it's up to the local authority how they spend it. Clearly, according to Rachel, that isn't happening. where's the disconnect? Where's it going wrong?
Well, for me, I think where it goes wrong is at the local level, and the targets for housing should be developed locally.
Is it that the local authorities don't spend the money on the extra buses, GP surgeries?
Or they don't get enough money in, or they don't discuss properly with the developer what's going to happen before they give the planning permission. So we need to give local authorities the confidence to be very stringent about the conditions that they put on planning, and to make sure that when those houses are delivered, we're not ending up in this situation where there's loads and loads of pressure on other services, because people will start to resent it, quite rightly, and they will oppose it, and who can blame them?
Zia.
Well, during the DEI answers, we heard a lot about root causes. And so I'd like to just zoom out for a minute and just talk about what we're really talking about here. We're talking about access to healthcare services. We're talking about housing. We're talking about policing. We're talking ultimately about infrastructure. And listen, I'm a second-generation immigrant in this country. My parents came here in the early 1980s, have contributed a great deal, I'd like to think. And so nobody knows better than I the invaluable contribution that migration can have to a country like the UK. But the sheer size and the scale of the population explosion that we have seen is absolutely unfathomable. During the 14 years of Tory rule, they exploded the size of the population by 6.5 million net new people, having promised in their 2010 manifesto, their 2015 manifesto, and their 2017 manifesto to bring net migration down to the tens of thousands. And in doing so, they left office with fewer hospital beds in the United Kingdom than where they started. And I'll tell you what, this has real consequences. Last year, according to the Office of National Statistics, 57,000 British people lost their lives due to undue waiting times in accident and emergency. These are third world numbers. This is unbecoming of a country as great as ours. So yes, we can get into planning and zoning, but ultimately we have to freeze net migration for a number of years, not forever, but for a number of years, until we build enough infrastructure to cope, so that people don't live in fear. Tens of millions of people in this country are petrified of getting sick, lest they have to have contact with, unfortunately, the National Health Service that I love, my family loves, and I know everybody watching at home loves as well. Reform is the only party that is willing to be honest about this situation. We will freeze migration for a number of years, and then we will build enough infrastructure to cope. And that is the only way we will improve living standards and quality of life for the British people.
If you freeze migration, where will you get the people to build the infrastructure?
Well, this is another... Unfortunately, this is just an untruth that is peddled. If we look at the last 6 years, 3.1 million net new people arrived in the country. Do you know what percentage of those came in on work visas? 16%.
I know there are lots of dependents that came with.
1/6. Dependents, families, students. You could, and again, I say this as someone who has heard at the dinner table for most of my childhood all of the stories of frontline NHS workers from my parents. The reality is you could restaff every doctor and nurse in the National Health Service with just last year's net immigration number. So listen, we're talking about net migration here. Around 400,000 people a year sadly leave the United Kingdom. We will still issue visas to truly the brightest and best people who will contribute to the economy immediately, people willing to come and invest millions of pounds in this country, and to where there are specific skill shortages. But when you ask questions like that, and I understand why you ask them, Fiona, but I don't know how many people at home understand this. We have a cap in this country. The United Kingdom, as a result of the Tory party, and it is still in place under this Labour government, there's a cap on the number of homegrown new doctors that can graduate. I mean, how insane is that? No more than 9,500 new homegrown doctors. And then we ask questions like, how will we staff our NHS?
Well, no, the question I asked was, how would you build the infrastructure? Just because there happens to be a shortage at the moment of construction workers.
Well,
and you said, you know, you'd build the infrastructure. I'm just asking you that.
Yeah, so if you look at during the period when there was a massive increase in the population as a result of immigration after Boris Johnson came to power, so if you look at the last 5 years, there's been no massive improvement in construction. So, look, yes, we need to build more infrastructure. The housing crisis, the fact that a third of our young adults aged 20 to 32 still live at home with their parents. Not only is buying a home totally out of reach for them, that's a pipe dream. Renting a home, just moving out of their parents' home, is now out of their reach. The only way we're going to solve these problems is by, yes, building more homes. We have to do that. But it's also a demand problem. By failing to talk about the demand problem, which is what the Tories and Labour do, it's like trying to put out a forest fire with a super soaker.
But just briefly, because obviously you've talked for quite some time there, do you accept, do you believe that if you want to build more infrastructure, I appreciate you want to have fewer people come to the UK, but you'll need to import some people in order to build that infrastructure?
No, I disagree with that. And one way we're going to increase the number of people working in this country, reforms policy, we will eliminate income tax on earnings below £20,000 a year. So what we will do is make work pay. We have a lot of people on benefits. We speak to people all the time who say, we want to come off benefits, but we can't because the marginal rate of tax, and this is, again, unbelievable and self-harming in this country. If you are on benefits and you start working more than 16 hours a week, your marginal rate of tax is more than 100%. So policies like that will get people back into work, and we'll have British workers working on those construction sites.
Alison.
Well, I mean, certainly we have got a problem. We've got a lot of people at the moment in this country who aren't working, that we need to get back into work. And I think we need to make work pay, and I agree with that. And I think that's why things like the work that has been done by the government on making work pay and ensuring there are good quality jobs for people, that is a really good thing. And then I think there is some work that's also going on to make sure that people do their bit and are contributing to the country. So that's all good. And I think also there is clearly an anxiety in the country at the moment about the numbers of people that are coming in. And so there needs to be a sense that there is some control, which I think for a long time there hasn't been that sense. But I think where perhaps there is a sort of a slightly simplistic kind of approach to this is if it was that easy, I'm guessing people like, you know, Boris Johnson and David Cameron, who did pledge to do it, why didn't they do it? So certainly we've got to look at how we are going to do it. And I think a big thing that we keep coming back to is that the country has used cheap labour from abroad so that big businesses can make a huge amounts of money, that hasn't been shared more broadly. And I think that we need to get back to paying workers a good salary. And then I think as a result of that, we would get more where we need to be.
Man here in the front.
Thank you. I don't know how we've gone from talking about local issues and concerns and the housing and the infrastructures to now suddenly doing some party political broadcasting against each other. What we're asking here is about the infrastructure of people. Get the numbers. I think that's another topic, another question perhaps. But within there's some real deep-rooted concerns about the policing, about the antisocial behaviour. Was it, if I remember now, was it in terms of Labour saying they're going to get tough on crime and they're going to crack down on ASB? That's part of their mission.
Antisocial behaviour.
Yeah, but that's part of their mission. But is it more of a mission impossible? And actually, we should be looking back at the local stuff that's being talked about here, as opposed to going on and talking about amounts of people here. It's about infrastructure, it's about communities, it's about integrity, it's about getting back to the grassroots stuff that really does work. And there's plenty of other things within the country that are beacons of success. I think what we've done is we've lost the plot. And I think what the opportunity here is get back to some grassroots stuff where the people that want to make some decisions work within the community and are part of that. And we all know if you are part of that and it's in your blood and it's in your generation, then you're going to have the door wide open for you. So in summary, there's an opportunity here to talk about the local grassroots. But I think we've got blown off course because we're more concerned about what our own party particular views are. Thank you.
OK. One with the glasses, yeah.
I was basically going to say pretty much the same as the gentleman there has just said. I think it's disappointing that the conversation was, well, the question was hijacked and then became about immigration, because I don't think that the majority of people in the audience would feel that immigration is at the bottom of the problems that we've got with regard to infrastructure not keeping pace with the amount of buildings that are being built around in this area, which impacts on every single person in here. We have the largest medical practice here in the country, Latham House, where there is a plan for another one. But what seems to be at fault here is the administration, because there must be advance warning that all of these things are going to happen, all these housing develops are going to happen. There's a time lag between when we start talking about the medical practice, about schools, about everything else, and that's where the problem is. And that's really, I think, what the panel should be trying to answer.
Well, we'll come to that. Woman behind you.
I'd just like to say I agree with what the last two people have had to say. And with regards to what's lacking here, thousands of new houses have been built over the last few years. None of the infrastructure has been looked at. If you speak to any of the local MP people, councillors, they always say they've got no money. But the way I see it is all these thousands of new houses that are being built, they're going to be getting council tax money from those houses. They're all expensive houses. I mean, even those that are meant to be low cost for first-time buyers, you know, £250,000. And so they'll have, you know, a lot more income coming in. So I don't know why they can't afford these things. And also, all these extra houses are going to have a lot more cars, a lot more vehicles. And the roads here are shocking.
Okay.
Yeah, the amount of damage that it must be done. I drive around a lot and I can't go down a road without having to mind a pothole. It's at one of the... I mean, everywhere, I think, in the country is like that, but Melton Mowbray is particularly bad.
So, James, obviously, the Labour government's mantra is build, 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 bulldoze through objections, NIMBYs, don't want to hear from them. What do you say to the people here saying we're having loads of building but not getting anything that goes with it, that they need?
Well, I would say...
Are you going to change that?
Well, I would say that what people in the audience are talking about in terms of infrastructure is a really important point. You need infrastructure for new homes. I would actually go further and say you need infrastructure for people who live in homes which already exist. I think infrastructure across the country needs attention and investment, and that's partly what we've been saying in terms of funding the NHS. This week, the Chancellor was talking about investment in reservoirs to make sure that our water supply can cope with demand.
Just sticking to more, because I hear very keenly that you're saying we're getting off the point, you want to talk about local housing. If the problem is that, and to be honest, I've heard this debate pretty much in so many places I've gone to with Question Time, houses are getting built, but nothing is getting built to go with them. Be it GP surgeries, you know, more police officers because there are more people, more transport, whatever it might be. Given you know, Labour has talked at length about wanting to build more houses, are you going to change that so that people will see the infrastructure with it as the houses are built?
There is more of a focus on infrastructure from this government than there has been in the past, certainly 14 years from the previous government, because you know, we talked about developer contributions to infrastructure, and it is important that developers make a contribution, but it's also important that the national government plays its role in providing infrastructure for all citizens, whether that's NHS, water supply, investment in roads, investment in railways and so on. We need to make sure that infrastructure is there because we are determined to build homes. And, you know, I need to be very direct about this and that we do need more housing. We need to make sure the next generation have opportunities to buy a home or to rent a home at an affordable value. You know, we have started reforming the planning system because we think at the moment the balance is wrong. Not enough homes are being built. We need to shift that balance and make sure that the regulation and some of the things that block new homes being built gets out of the way of us needing to build those homes. But the point about infrastructure is very well made, and I would say it's essential for new homes, but it's also essential for all of us in this country to improve the infrastructure we have.
But I think the local councillors are the people who know what is needed by the local community, and you need to empower them to make sure that the plans include all that infrastructure. All right. And what you're at risk of doing is devolving that upwards and saying, we don't want to hear from local councillors, we just want to build it. And I think that will bring about the wrong outcomes.
Let me bring in Kieran. So, obviously, I mean, for example, the housing development here, this was obviously approved by the local council, but this was all happening under the last government, i.e. the Conservatives.
Yes.
These people here clearly don't feel the infrastructure came along with it.
And I've, like you said, Fiona, I've heard this so many times. I hear it in my own constituency, and I think
why wasn't something done about it?
I mean, part of what we have to do as in opposition now is reflect on what we didn't get right when we were in government. And I think certainly I'm very open in saying that on this issue of how you bring infrastructure at the same time as housing, we didn't crack that. And you'll be experiencing that, and I've seen that. The ambition was there, but we didn't do that. And Kemi, our new leader, is very clear that we're under new leadership now, and it's for us to take the time to really think through. These things aren't easy, but how do we manage that? How do we ensure when we're building homes, the infrastructure goes with it? My worry would be in terms of what Labour are now doing in the short term is, let's hope that they do come up with a way of doing it better, because the first thing they've actually done is increase your housing targets in the local area. In many areas just like this, the number of houses you're going to have to build has gone even higher. So they've done that first before they've come up with the solutions on this issue, and at the same time as lowering the housing targets for places like London. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think we should be putting further pressure on rural areas who are experiencing these kind of issues at the same time as saying to the Labour mayor in London, but we'll let you build less houses. And I think it's pretty clear what the political motivation is for that.
Woman in the front here, a little bit further. There you are.
This may be a reason for us to look, and I gather it is being looked at having county and local amalgamated, because often there are duplications of jobs. A doesn't agree with what B's doing, or A reneges on what B has asked for and they've agreed to previously. I'm not saying who's doing what, but that is what happens. And it seems to me this is a real opportunity to cut a lot of red tape and to make sure that things happen, and that we shouldn't be having debates about this. These things should be done in tandem. And when agreements are made with planners, my understanding is, I think as you've already mentioned, Madam Chairman, that in fact what happens is it is agreed with the planning as about the infrastructure, about so much money should be allocated to this, and it doesn't get always gets carried out, and that means developers then get away with it.
All right. The person at the very back, I think you've got a green top, I can't quite see. Yes, you there.
Yeah, you talk about planning in opposition, but this is not a new problem. You had 14 years to try and get on top of it, and you didn't.
Yeah, we didn't get it right on this issue. That's correct.
And the man a little bit further forward with the glasses, look there, in the red jacket, yeah.
I just want to pick up as an immigrant, going back to that earlier point, a first-generation immigrant and someone who loves Melton Mowbray and has built a business. The angle, I think, is missed in here and gets distorted by people like Reform is community pride. So there's services, but there's also all of these people coming into the community should feel welcome. And they're not immigrants, so I know that versus they're people that might be coming from Nottingham or Leicester, and made to feel part of the community and, you know, to shop in town, to do all of those types of things. But with the kind of rhetoric around immigration and the causes of these things, people just live their lives on Facebook. They don't meet their neighbours. They don't want to be part of the community. And that's something that we have a great community in Melton Mowbray. And rightly, with the people here in the audience, we don't welcome people who want other people. We want a better community, but we want great services and a great town centre. And, yeah, everyone is welcome in this town and we want more people.
Do you want to respond to that, Zia?
Well, look, I have enormous sympathy and empathy for all of this concern about Melton Mowbray and how these issues impact people locally, because that's how we live our lives.
To that man's specific point.
To that specific point, look, Reform is a party that believes in the enterprise and dynamism of the British people. We believe the British people should be prioritised over foreign citizens. And when you talk about welcoming people, what you're really talking about there, you actually talked, you didn't use the word assimilation, but that is effectively what you're talking about. You're talking about people coming and being welcomed into the community. There is no doubt, as a result of the sheer scale of the size of the population increase, assimilation simply has not happened. And I say this as a second-generation immigrant. When my parents came to this country in the early 1980s, net migration to this country is in the tens of thousands. That's why they assimilated. They had lots of friends in the local community of lots of different faiths and backgrounds. What's happened now, again, as a sheer scale, last year, net migration into this country was 1 million people. I want to make one other point, Fiona, if I may, please, because we talked about infrastructure and we talked about policing and we talked about schools and we've been talking about housing. This is how the population explosion manifests itself. It manifests itself locally. So when we talk about the size of the 6.5 million net new people, that increase under the Tories, and they left with fewer. You left with fewer hospital beds in this country.
Yeah, you did make that point already, in fairness.
A few hundred net new prison places. You can draw a straight line between that and the fact that people don't feel safe right now. There are violent criminals still terrorising people across this country. It is because of a lack of planning. When you have an explosion of that speed, you cannot build infrastructure fast enough. You cannot plan for it.
We are out of time, I'm afraid. Just wanted to jump in there, so forgive me. Apologies to those who've still got your hands up. I couldn't get round all of you, but thank you very much for taking part. That is it. Our time is up. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you very much to all of you for coming along this evening. And, of course, thank you to you at home for watching. Until next week. from Question Time. Oh, bye-bye. Oh, before I go, I just want to say, I nearly forgot, Grace Croxall took the lovely pictures we've had of Melton Mowbray. We showed them at the beginning of the programme. Thank you, Grace. You went above and beyond, and we're very grateful. From all of us here, bye-bye.